So yes, we'll hope to just keep deepening what we're opening here, and to continue, we'll bring the second panel of the foundation stone, and Dottie will introduce Peter after.
Yeah.
So much. Soul of man, thou livest in the beat of heart and lung, which leads thee through the rhythmic tides of time into the feeling of thine own soul being. Practice spirit mindfulness in balance of the soul, wherein the surging deeds of the world's becoming does thine own eye unite unto the eye of the world. Then, mid-weaving of the soul of man, thou wilt truly feel. For the Christ will in the encircling round hold sway, in rhythms of worlds blessing the souls. Spirits of light, Kyriotetes, Dynamis, Exousiae. Let this be fired from the east, what in the west takes on form, speaking, in Christo morimur. In Christ, death becomes life. The elemental beings hear this in east, west, north, and south. May human beings hear it.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you so much, Christiane and Milena and Daniel. Thank you, Peter, for being here with us today with this picture of Elisabeth Vreede and our healing and reconciliation journey. Thank you for this whole year, supporting our work on this theme. Welcome.
Now you may begin, Peter. Thank you.
Yes, I can do. Is the sound and voice good enough, Frank?
It's a flowering beauty of sound.
Okay, good preconditions to talk about Elisabeth Vreede. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me again to join you, and a big honor to talk about Elisabeth Vreede on this opportunity. I just directly jump into the theme. It won't be long before I will forgotten, she said to friends sometimes. And Madeleine van Deventer said, she said it in a very refreshing, unsentimental manner. And in fact, she is forgotten, almost forgotten, Elisabeth Vreede. It was a shock not only for me when her house was sold. It was in 2007, her house and the ashes. It belonged until this time to the Arlesheim Clinic, and it was sold. It's now out of anthroposophical hands. And it was also a shock in 2009, end of August. It's 3 days, in fact, before her 66th anniversary. There was a special edition of the Goetheanum newspaper about the theme of the starry world, because it was the International Year of Astronomy, 2009. But in fact, she was not mentioned. And this is no negative will, but in a way, she's absent, Elisabeth Vreede. It won't be long before I will be forgotten. But she said it, as I mentioned, in a refreshing, unsentimental manner. So it's good to talk about her. I mean, I wouldn't say because she feels lonesome or sad in the spiritual world. I think there is no reason to think in this direction. But I think the anthroposophical movement needs her. She's not maybe so much needing us, but building those bridges to the spiritual world, and insofar enabling them to help us needs our own reconnection. So, and therefore, even if we are only online and on the computer, I'm very grateful for your whole initiative to bring into consciousness and mind Albert Steffen, we heard, by Christiane Heid, and also Guenther Wachsmuth. Partly they are also forgotten. But of course, I will focus on Elisabeth Vreede, and I'll do it in my bad English, but I'll prefer to do it in English also because she had this link to the English-speaking world. Her first encounter with Rudolf Steiner took place in London, and later on she gave lectures in London about anthroposophy and threefold community, and she gave a major lecture in Daniel Dunlop's World Conference on Spiritual Power and its Practical Application, which took place in 1928 in London, in the center of London, 2,000 visitors. Anthroposophy showed its importance for the world. And this Elisabeth Vreede had the theme spiritual aspects of anthroposophy. It was published later in the present age in this magazine, edited by Daniel Dunlop and also Walter Johannes Stein. And she gave class lessons in English as well as Guenther Wachsmuth did. So London and the English-speaking world played a huge role in her life. Also the path of anthroposophy to the West. And insofar that you are trying now to partly reconnect and recollect members and collect also with those spirits, I appreciate very much. It won't be long before I will be forgotten, but as always, we are by our own part of the problem. Insofar, Elisabeth was quite shy. She was shy and spoke rarely about herself or about her inner life. I mean, other people in the society and movement today or in these years, they like to talk about themselves. They like to talk, they like to give lectures and to present themselves in the journals or wherever is a stage. But she did not. She was in the background. But on the other side, she made a huge impact if somebody really encountered her. So Emanuel Seilmans of Emmichhoven, we heard just by Christiane, and the father was mentioned, Willem Seilmans, the famous general secretary of the Netherlands. Emanuel Seilmans, the son of Willem, who became the biographer of Guenther Wachsmuth, as probably you all know, he reminded Elisabeth Vreede very well, and he met her as a schoolboy in the Waldorf school in The Hague or at home. But the home place of Emanuel was the clinic. So the clinic of Willem Seilmans in The Hague. The children grew up in the clinic. So in his memories, he said about Elisabeth Vreede, just to quote him, Emanuel Seilmans, I have the strongest memories of Vreede. I mean, the strongest B and other famous anthroposophists. Above all, how she was a guest with us in class of the Waldorf school, or how she sat with a wooden countenance at our table in our home. I had a very strong connection with her after her death. I believe that she was spiritually very honest. She was unrelentingly truthful with regard to herself and to all other anthroposophists, and to anthroposophy itself, even to the point of sacrificing herself. That is the character of the consciousness soul. With Vreede, I had the deepest experience of the consciousness soul. That's an enormous word, the deepest experience of the consciousness soul, das der Bewusstseinsseele, as they say in German. Another little memory, it's all from the book which Marsha Post translated years ago. Oh, how to present it. About Elisabeth Vreede in Steiner books, so there is no need to collect money for translation. Marsha did it very well, and she gallantly promoted and helped this publication to come out in 2017. And in this book, there is a little memory of George Adams Kaufman, also important. He said, where others remained silent, she raised her voice without worrying about how it would be accepted. She detested all careful weighing of the effect of her deeds. When she had to choose between cleverness and truthfulness, she did not have to think about which she needed to choose, even when perhaps an existing rift would only become greater. So this is maybe the opposite of what I said before, that she was silent in the background, but sometimes she came on the stage, especially in the general meetings at the Goetheanum big hall. And she had the opinion that something went wrong in the Goetheanum in those years. And there, without any fear, she said what she thought has to be said. Another short quotations. Nell Schutborn from the Netherlands, the second wife of Bernard Liverhood, about Elisabeth Vreede. One could always be sure that her statements were accurate and well substantiated. One felt that what she said is true. She walked and stood calmly, resting within herself. She was well dressed simply and tastefully. She looked upon one in her calm and friendly way. There was a certain strength and power coming from her. As a rock, one could build on her, said a friend of her, Dora Krück von Potocin, a famous writer in Germany. A rock one could build on. She had a special affinity, Dora Krück, to the Knight Templars, as Elisabeth Vreede had. And the important thing that the impression of a rock was still existing when she had to leave the society and to give up everything. Everything was taken away from her, as Christiane mentioned, in 1935. Her section for mathematics and astronomy, including her responsibility for the observatory and the section newsletters. It was also taken from her the membership in the council and the Rudolf Steiner archive, which was her work. I come to it a little bit later on. She had set it up in the Goetheanum, the Rudolf Steiner archive. You could say she lost her entire professional and anthroposophical existence. And there is a huge difference to Ita Wegman, just to mention, because let's say, I would say when the Goetheanum lost Ita Wegman, her work went on. The center of the medical section was still her clinic, and the Sonnenhof with the home for the children in need of special care. I think also Alan Potter is listening to us tonight. So the Sonnenhof was also a training center for curative education. Dr. Koenig was taught there. So Campbell started there. And just to mention that the Goetheanum could not affect these places. I mean, it was so tragic that when in the late 1930s, somebody sent a letter to the Goetheanum, today it would be an email, asking is there an anthroposophical cancer therapy, or do you have any institutions to take care for children with special need? The official answer from the Goetheanum, I studied it in the archive, did not mention the Arlesheim Clinic or the Sonnenhof. So after the split, it was totally ignored by the officials, but the places were still existing and working. So Ita Wegmann lost nothing. That's not correct. She lost the Goetheanum, the building, her room there, and the feeling of being connected to Rudolf Steiner's initiative on the hill. But from a medical point of view, or from the point of curative education, almost nothing changed. Beyond the fact that many of the anthroposophical doctors also stopped contacting Ita Wegmann because they were linked to Mary Steiner or Albert Steffen. This did not happen in the field of curative education. She was still responsible for all the homelands, home places. And so they were all keeping the connection to Ita Wegmann. But just to say, Elisabeth Vreede had no more place, only her house, and the house was sold in 2007 with the ashes in the garden. So for me, she's the major victim, if we think in those categories, which she would not like. I will talk a little bit about later. She did not like to have these victims images, and but just to say, she lost everything on her path. But she was very decisive and said, yes, I will decide for myself what my attitude will be. That means no false compromise, even if everything is lost. Just for a breathing second for you, when I published the book about her later on, years ago, I got letters from people. And some of them said to me, you know, Peter Selg, I have no clue of the Anthroposophical Society. I'm not linked at all to the Goetheanum, but this life biography was totally important for me because I also lost many things in my life or underwent a certain tragedy. And it was so helpful to study your book, even if I'm not interested in anthroposophy or the society in general. So I got letters like this. And I thought, how interesting, because of course I published it and Jean Gallagher brought it in the United States for the society. I mean, for our Anthroposophical Society. But those people who sent these letters, they were not connected to the society. I don't know how they found the book. But anyway, they felt that she is somebody extremely important for surviving in the future. Maybe we all will lose many things. So what is then beyond this kind of catastrophic events? For them, Elisabeth Vreede was a person to look up to her. So I won't create a sad hour now, only 45 minutes now resting, because in a way it is quite powerful how she survived and how she lived. And of course, we all would like if the Anthroposophical Society history would be nicer, with less tragedies and more stars. And of course, the Goetheanum would be more powerful and the society would have more members. But anyhow, it belongs to this story. And Elisabeth Vreede was an actor in my story tonight. And
Ja, ich höre dir und
oh,
danke.
somebody's talking beyond me. I hope you can follow my voice.
Okay, yes, they're just saying the German translation will now begin with Daniel, so please choose that and you'll be able to hear. Is that okay? Was that you, Amalia? Is that okay?
For me, it is okay.
Yes.
The other ones have
Yes.
still the option to have good sound, and it's fine.
The sound is good. Thank you.
Good. So
All
I'll
right,
go
then.
on a little bit
Thank
more into the mystery of of Elisabeth Vreede. I said, yes, she never pushed herself on a prominent place. She was in the background, as Edith Marion was, which I mentioned in my contribution about Edith Marion, never stood in the spotlight, working selflessly in the background, but with an ancient element of wisdom, Madeleine van Deventer said. This is a very special nomination, an ancient element of wisdom. Dr. Steiner once said during the Christmas conference, she is a very old member. This is partly strange because this very old member was 44 years old. If you are 44 years old at the moment, you are absolutely young in the Anthroposophical Society because the society is so old that if you only have 44 years, you are regarded as maybe a youngster. In those years, 44 was not young. Guenther Wachsmuth was almost 30 years old. I think that Dr. Steiner did not want to say that she is very old as a woman, and neither that she is a very old member, 200 years. No, I mean, she was a member at this time for a little bit more than 20 years. You can say this is a very old member, but I think he said it jokingly, in a way that there was another kind of membership, this ancient element of wisdom. I think this is a very special thing in her case. I once published a study about possible destiny connections, because to Elisabeth Vreede, also to Vreede's mother, Steiner spoke quite openly about history, individual history. That means the past, individual past, and he brought light on two important historical personalities in a way linked to her. I can't say in an absolute direct line, but linked. I mean, we can be linked in different ways. Not a question who is who only, but a kind of a destiny connection. Plinius the Older and Jacques de Molay, the leader of the Knight Templars. So I published a little study about these two personalities in relation to Elisabeth Vreede. And I would say it's interesting, at least interesting. And it's good to study 2000 years, old wisdom, old members. Sometimes it's not only because they are 44 years old or more than 20 a member. So I'll talk a little bit now about her earthly biography. In fact, it is true she became an early member in her biography. And the thing was that she grew up in a total theosophical or
Peter is frozen.
Yes, that is true.
How can we unfreeze him?
I'm not sure. Let's see what happens. Maybe he'll have to come back on in a second. Yes, it seems we've lost him there. So that-
Milena, maybe if you're here, you can call him in case he's not sure. Okay, here he is.
what have you done with me?
It was just getting one a little drama, that's all. I think the connection might have been a little, yes, if everyone turns off their videos, it should support better, less information. So yes, back to you.
So I lost you totally. Suddenly I realized that the screen was vanished.
Yes.
Okay, so
After Jacques
Theosophical?
Millet, after the two individualities that we could look at was the last thing that we had heard.
And they were invested in a theosophical movement, maybe?
okay, good. I reconnect to where I got lost. So I just wanted to mention that she grew up in a house where Dr. Steiner gave lectures, but before Steiner came into the parents' home, it was Colonel Alcott who came into the house. So the founder of the Theosophical Society, together with Helena Petrova Blavatsky in New York, Alcott was a frequent guest in the parental home of the parents of Elisabeth Vreede in The Hague. So this is, I think you all grew up in different conditions. Never Colonel Alcott came to your parents. And later on, Dr. Steiner came and gave private lectures, anthroposophical lectures and esoteric lessons in the house of the Vredes in The Hague. So she grew up in such an atmosphere. And she was a very gifted child. I mean, she was intellectually brilliant. Her memory was absolutely fascinating. She knew Faust Part 1 and 2 in German by heart. And she was studying astronomy in French, big volumes. And nobody really understood why this child is so clever. And then later on, after finishing school, she went to University of Leiden and studied mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, an adoration for the philosopher Hegel and his enormously disciplined thinking, as she said. I mean, maybe it's for you not so interesting or exciting, but at these years, she's born in 1875. It was an exception that a woman is studying astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, and did a PhD and was a fan of Hegel, but also was very sportive and very active in doing sports and totally independent. And anthroposophy, yes, she knew it, or theosophy, from the parents. And then she joined the Theosophical Society in so just at the beginning of the 20th century, against a certain inner resistance. She said, something in me rebelled, the more against it, as I had the feeling that not even the most violent resistance would be of any use. There is a force that is stronger than you are in your ordinary consciousness, and this force is directing you there. I had known such forces in my life, but was not used to them placing me into something so impenetrable. So very special. She felt she had to join this society, even she did not want to. And she described it very well. And the first lectures you heard by Steiner in London, it was in July 1903. She saw this inner fire in Steiner and his temperament of speech, but she thought it's too impulsive. It was as if he wanted to communicate to the world the strength and significance of his mission in every sentence. From the black hair flying around his small head to the remarkably animated gestures of his hands and arms, and with the immensely emphatic nature of his words, he appeared to make himself into the physical embodiment of what he had to say. Quite humorful as a description, but to be honest, she did not like it. In a way, it was for her too much. I mean, she thought, why not just bringing some thoughts instead of bringing this energy? What kind of fight is he fighting there with the audience? And she kept a certain distance. She became a member, as I said, of the Society, the Theosophical, before. But then the breakthrough was, in fact, in Munich in 1907. You know, this Rosicrucian conference directed by Steiner. It was an international conference of the Theosophical Society. He was responsible for Germany, but he invited all the other countries, so also the Netherlands. And she came, and she later said, you know, these lectures he gave there about on theosophy of the Rosicrucian was the breakthrough. Why? She said, in these lectures, I experienced nothing of the dissatisfaction that the theosophical teachings always left with me. What Rudolf Steiner presented there was scientifically comprehensive and convincing. The longing for the spirit found its fulfillment in spiritual insight. Before, apart from Steiner, she was suffering that science, and she studied natural science, and because she was a fan of Hegel, she studied also philosophy as a spiritual science. But in theosophy, she always said there was for me such a dissatisfaction because it was not scientifically comprehensive and convincing what the theosophists brought. Anyway, she became a member, but there was this gap in between science of the universities and theosophy. And in Steiner talking in Munich and developing his lectures, instead of convincing people as in London, he did, I think it was a fight in London, but it's not my theme now. But this Munich experience was for her that she could absolutely said yes. Later on, Dr. Steiner once said that Elisabeth Vreede is one of those who best understands my lectures. In a way, she was a brilliant person in listening to anthroposophy. And from Munich on, she started to deeper study anthroposophy. She became a member of the esoteric school led by Steiner, and she left Annie Besant, and she went with Steiner as Ita Wegman did, and she bought the book How to Know Higher Worlds and Practice the Exercises. She was deeply, deeply impressed of the Rosicrucian path, of the mission of Christian Rosenkreuz, shouted by Steiner. And the mission of Rosenkreuz was to transform old mystery knowledge in new mystery, modern knowledge. And this transformation, this was very important for Elisabeth Vreede. She knew what is old wisdom and old mystery knowledge. And in the 20th century, she was really a very modern person, a very modern academic woman. And the transformation between the times was her main interest. Yeah, and interesting enough, she followed then all other lectures of Steiner. Probably there is no one, apart from Mary Steiner, who heard so many lectures of Dr. Steiner as Elisabeth Vreede. She could afford to do it because she was financially independent. We always say it in German, probably it's also in English, to be independent economically. That means you have enough money just to live. So it's a very nice terminus to be independent. And it's a wonderful state if you don't, there is no need to work. So you can work, but there is no need for an income. And in fact, the family was quite rich. And they helped Elisabeth Vreede, or they just supported her path because they also were connected to theosophy, anthroposophy. And so she had the ability to follow Steiner's path and listening the lectures. And very special in the intellectual capacities of Vreede was that she was able to remind everything. So incredible that she heard thousands of lectures and she was like a living memory what she heard. But not enough. She went to Berlin to live with Dr. Steiner, not in the same room, not in the same apartment, but in the same house. If you know Berlin, the house is still there, Motzstraße 17, a big house, and Steiner rented an apartment, and all the other apartments by the time were in anthroposophical hands. I mean, it was not just a big community, it was a kind of a working community, because on one level they started a little publishing house. On the other level, you could get the tickets for the lectures and so on and so on. And she lived there together with Edith Marion over years and was very close to Rudolf Steiner's activities in Berlin. And then she went to Dornach just to help there, building the first Goetheanum. That means she helped in the building office doing mathematics, but also engraving in the glass windows, mathematical calculation of the cupolas, which was quite a challenge, but also she carved the pillows. I mean, she did whatever was needed. That was the same style than Edith Marion, to do what is needed and to bring in your gifts, but doing everything. And also Vreede was responsible or helped to organize conferences at the Goetheanum. She managed the registrations and the accounts. And then she started to establish a Rudolf Steiner archive. Now, what is a Rudolf Steiner archive? Probably you will think that is what Mary Steiner had and what we still have near the Goetheanum. So a place where Steiner's works are edited. And that's what Mary Steiner always did. She collected the stenograms and she trying to print the lectures and also the books. That's not what Elisabeth Vreede wanted to do because Mary Steiner did it already. But she wanted to have everything together to create a place at the Goetheanum where everybody could come and study Steiner. For her, it was maybe one of the hard chambers of the School of Spiritual Science. That means all these lectures and books are there, but the mystery maybe was Elisabeth Vreede herself, because she was welcoming the visitors and you could ask her about Steiner's works. And she was a living memory, as I said, and she helped people to study. And she knew where they had to study. She knew the works. So it was a social task for her to create a place to study anthroposophy, also an atmosphere to study anthroposophy, but also that people are here who could help younger people or just foreigners or guests to find her way into anthroposophy. And because she had money, she could get all the stenograms and creating an archive. As far as I could find out, it was the first problem with Mary Steiner. Because in a way, if it's true, Mary Steiner did not see the necessity. Because she had the collection and she will publish them. Year by year, new books came out. But for Elisabeth Vreede, as I mentioned, it was not only a question of books. Some people could not afford the books, or they just wanted to read, and maybe they need help, as I said, and assistance. And it took time to bring the books out. I mean, the collected works are still not fulfilled. But Vreede had it all together. And so there was a certain tension, and not from the side of Elisabeth Vreede, of course not, but from Mary Steiner's side. And Steiner obviously helped both of them. And Elisabeth Vreede said it was his name, Rudolf Steiner Archive. When I asked him, how should we call this place? He said, I think, of course, Rudolf Steiner Archive. So it was maybe more than a joke. It was his work. And so it was Rudolf Steiner's archive. And in the world, in the time of the First World War, I just want to mention she went back to Berlin for a certain period of time, and she helped people who were imprisoned, English people from England who were imprisoned, and she helped children, and she did social work. Just to mention that she had a really social heart, Elisabeth Vreede. And interesting, she was always surrounded by children, even she had no own children. But it's very interesting, a deep relationship to children without being a mother in a conventional way. In the biography about her in German and English available, there are wonderful pictures of Elisabeth Vreede and the children. I said to you at the beginning, she gave lectures in England in English about social threefoldness, translated important things of Steiner, went to the Netherlands, gave lectures there. Were not so many women in those years who were on the stage giving lectures. And yeah, when the Goetheanum was burned down, she was the first one, together also with Steffen and Mary and Guenther Wachsmuth, to collect money, to organize a fundraising. Her own family gave an enormous sum to give Steiner the possibility to build a second Goetheanum. Yeah, and she was greatly honored, and probably totally unexpectedly, that Steiner appointed her into the executive council, despite the fact that she was not one of the most prominent anthroposophists, and also overjoyed when he established a section for mathematics and astronomy at the new School of Spiritual Science, and handed also this section over to her. And he said in the Christmas conference, Elisabeth Vreede brings together thorough anthroposophical insight with an excellent clarity about how anthroposophy should be introduced into the individual sciences. This is an enormous sentence, that she was one who bring together thoroughly anthroposophical insights with an excellent clarity about how anthroposophy should be introduced into the individual sciences. This is maybe one of our most important still existing problems. And Steiner appreciated her very, very much. Also in Berlin, before the Goetheanum was erected, sometime he came to her and said, Dr. Vreede, could you give some lectures about mathematics in the branch here in Berlin? They can't follow my anthroposophical lectures without basic knowledge and skills in mathematics. So she gave lectures about mathematical problems in the branches. So he used her, or she helped him for a certain level. And when the Goetheanum was opened with the so-called first high school course, she gave a lecture, or Steiner requested her, the lecture, The Justification of Mathematics in Astronomy and Its Limits. And which, among other things, the lecture examined Albert Einstein theory of relativity. So quite a brilliant woman she was. And Steiner was very pleased by this lecture and wanted to have it print. Many other lectures of anthroposophists he did not like. He said there is a lack of anthroposophy in the lectures, but her lecture was okay for him. And with her section, I want to say that she was totally active. And she really developed quite a big section at this time. Her astronomical circular, a kind of a newsletter, had more than 1,000 subscribers, which was quite a sum at these years. And more than 200 English subscribers. So her main theme was Christ-imbued cosmosophy, we can say. She also published from her section Steiner's lectures about mathematics and astronomy, and she enabled people to research. She was enormously socially gifted, and to collect and other people as George Adams Kaufman, Willi Sucher, Lily Kalisko, she helped them, she enabled them to publish. She was looking for the money. So she wasn't only a star for her own, but a social heart of the section. What she developed also was a star calendar, also called a farmer's calendar, because the farmer used to use it. And just to mention, when Dr. Steiner gave in Kobowitz the famous course about agriculture, there were one esoteric lessons. And in the esoteric lesson, he said to the farmers that Elisabeth Vreede will be the person to create a bridge to the hierarchies through her work. So the bridge to the hierarchies and the stars will be built by Elisabeth Vreede and her section, Steiner said, in Kobowitz. I just want to mention it because in general, it's not really known. Yeah. And just want also to mention the lecture she gave when the second Goetheanum was opened. I published this lecture in my biography for the first time. And long time after she gave the lecture. It was the 2nd of October, 1928, when she gave the lecture about the impulse of Christmas and Michael. And very wonderful how she's talking in this lecture about the Christmas conference and the challenge of the Christmas conference and the new relationship between the anthroposophical movement and the society and the task of the School for Spiritual Science, and how the Anthroposophical Society is able, 3 years after Dr. Steiner's death, to connect to the spiritual world, to the living dead, to Dr. Steiner himself, how the Anthroposophical Society is able to pursue impulses from the spiritual world and such challenges. And she really had the courage to pose a question like this in the big hall. Do we have an anthroposophical society that is able to rightly express the inner, the esoteric, in the exoteric world, a society whose intentions are in line with those of the founder of this movement. It was not the voice of a critic. She was a member of the Executive Council, but she had the courage to pose the question, do we have this society who has the ability to rightly express the inner, the esoteric, in the exoteric world? And it's interesting that this lecture was printed first time in 2009. It was, I wrote this biography about Elisabeth Vreede in the Netherlands, and then it was published in 2009. It was the memory of her 66th death day. Yeah. And also Elisabeth Vreede had the courage to say after Dr. Steiner died that the month they had together with him in the Executive Council before he got ill were difficult. We in generally think that the problem started after Dr. Steiner's death, and the meetings before must have been wonderful. But in fact, she said it was a difficult time because Steiner was fully occupied with tidying up old debris, old shit in the Anthroposophical Society. So he wanted to found it anew. So the Christmas conference and a new society and a new school of spiritual science, but the old society was still existent. And you all know there is a huge change in the Christmas conference, but the people were the old people. I don't think by their age, by their inner behavior. And Steiner had a lot to do to create a change. And then she said, a social problem was that Mary Steiner never accepted Ita Wegman to be in the Executive Council. And in fact, Vreede said, I don't know if it's true, but she said it, and her memories are in generally brilliant. She said that for Mary Steiner, it was very hard to understand that she's not leading anymore the society together with Steiner alone, that there is now a group. And in the group is this Ita Wegman and this Elisabeth Vreede and this young Guenther Wachsmuth, 30 years old. And then, okay, Albert Steffen, a very good writer, but a member of an executive council. So Mary Steiner played a role in the council, but only a role. And Vreede said it was hard for her. And it was a hard time for this executive council. Yeah, I don't want to talk too much now, and time is almost over, about all the problems. And of course, it's a huge question why such a person as Elisabeth Vreede was expelled from the council, and what kind of direction in the Goetheanum took place that such a person could not be integrated or play her own role, and this will of destruction. I think we all sometimes think that there was no person who had this will of destruction. Probably you know that Ita Wegman said at the end of her life, we all thought that we did the best for the society. I would say from an occult level that the forces of destruction, they just went in and they used soul forces, jealousy, concurrence to destroy everything. So the will of destruction was, of course, not represented in Mary Steiner, Guenther Wachsmuth, and so on, even if it was the winning fraction, but in fact they were all losers, and so it's a mystery. And but Elisabeth Vreede always said, our brothers and sisters, they are going in the wrong direction, but we should help that they will find the better truth. because what they said about Ita Wegman and her, she knew that it was not true. These superstitions, these kind of accusations, they were not true, but it came a situation where nothing could help anymore. And there was an anthroposophist in Switzerland, and he advised Elisabeth Vreede, it was Karl Balmer, the philosopher, to go to the court, not to accept that she was expelled from the executive council. She should take legal steps to avoid it. And it was a letter to Elisabeth Vreede before the decisive council general meeting. But on the page of his letter, she wrote, what is missing? Love as a cognitive organ. She wrote it to the margins of the letter. And she said it directly also in her answer to him. She said, dear Mr. Balmer, one cannot call Mr. Steffen a Judas or Mrs. Steiner a person, as he did, while pretending to do something to improve the situation inside the society. So what we need, she said to him, is a cognitive organ of universal human love. Very interesting. An organ of universal human love. And she never went to the court and yes, said, there is something missing in your letter. This is love as a cognitive organ. And she always thought that after years, the misguided brothers and sisters, they will find out that it was wrong to expel her and Ita Wegman. And she went on, but she lost everything, as I said. She also lost the Rudolf Steiner archive, which was her own property. And in fact, her key did not work anymore. So they changed the lock. And so she had no more access to her own collection. It was brutal. It was very hard. But on the other side, she said, we will go on. And she worked with a lot of little anthroposophical groups in many countries and lived in her house and was absolutely aware of the difficult situation of the Second World War and then the Jews, the Jewish question, and tried to help people to escape but still believe that there will be a future for the anthroposophical society because anthroposophy is stronger than all these conflicts. And yeah, much more could be said about her lifestyle. It's interesting that Steiner gave a dedication mantra to her house where she lived in. And the words for the house, not for Elisabeth Vreede, are, may soul live in this house. May it be permeated with spirit, seeking firm will in the depth, so that devout consciousness may develop in every room of the building, and so that from above the blessings of the Spirit and the grace of God may be able to unite in all who live within. And this house of Elisabeth Vreede was always an open house for children, for teachers who came to conferences, to the Goetheanum. And she lived till the end. She went ill suddenly after Dr. Wegman died. She gave the memorial speech to Ita Wegman. And she said in the memorial speech for Ita Wegman, now the spiritual center of our movement is in the spiritual world. But then, some weeks later, she got ill, out of full health. And she recovered partly, but then went to recover to the Casa Andrea Cristoforo in Ascona, where Wegman lived all these last years. and there she passed the threshold. Wegmann came home to Arlesheim to die, and Elisabeth Vreede went to Ascona to die. It's very interesting how they crossed. And it's also interesting that her lifespan was exactly the one of Rudolf Steiner. So it's almost a day when she died. This is so long Steiner's biography longed. And interesting that he said, you know, you are so unknown, Elisabeth Vreede, because you are you were born too early. Originally, you had no incarnation now, but she came to be incarnated for the Anthroposophical Society at the onset. And she said, and he said, she's so unknown because all her connections, they are not here on earth. She came not premature, but pre-time to be with us in the beginning. Yeah, there could be much more said about this mystery. I will end with a short quotation of Elisabeth Vreede, which I like very much, out of one of her lectures. And then maybe we have some more time, some minutes for questions or not. But I think read the book about her. I mean, it's worth, and also the English translation by Marsha Post is quite good. It's good to go into Vreede's life and work and thoughts, very helpful for all of us and good for inner resistance. I mean, not in the Anthroposophical Society. I think the society problems are not our main problems in the future. We have other problems in the outer world, but we need fighters with such a mildness, Elisabeth Vreede, such an optimism, and also such a humor. She was a very humorful person. So the last quotation, the being of anthroposophy, I have always felt that it is a spiritual being newly created by Dr. Steiner, the first hierarchical being created by a human being, as it were, very young and still incomplete, like an infant, a being that now has to grow up through our working together as a community of knowledge and with help from its creator in the spiritual world. Thank you until this point. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. I think Frank must have somehow slipped off. We're going to say, what did you do with him? Oh, there is he here.
Yeah, I
Okay.
didn't slip off. I was just
Yeah.
knocked out there by the quote there. Yes, that's such a beautiful picture and brings a strong question of the work with the hierarchies and her home and the home of the stars and this doorway. Yeah, I've never heard any of these thoughts before. Thank you so much. One easier question to ask would be, I heard some people also wondering the name of the other identity whose stream was connected to Vreede, who wasn't from the Templars. If
There
you
were
could repeat that person's name, the first one you said.
Plinius the Older. Yeah, this is a very famous Roman aristocrat and collector of knowledge around the turning point of time, Plinius. You have a look to the dictionaries. Yeah, Plinius the Older. Yeah, I could tell more about Plinius the Older, but I think it's not our main challenge at the moment, Frank. Yeah.
Yes. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I feel, Peter, like we're just obviously just touching the tip of the iceberg of Elisabeth Vreede. Like, I feel so sad that it's ending now with so much, yeah, that's, I can feel living in my heart. And I'm thinking of three people that you mentioned. Well, you've mentioned many, but looking at Elisabeth Vreede, Wegman, and also Edith Marion, this kind of level of commitment that they had, and all of them. And I feel like I'm busting into a flame, and I'm also in a puddle of water. You know, there's something deeply moving and then deeply sad that wants to, and this question I wonder that keeps coming for me is, and I don't think that it can be answered, or I don't know how, but I don't know how to leave without it in a way, like in the fact that Rudolf Steiner says they will return, or the fact that they know they will work together again. This picture of where we are today as a society, where we are today as a movement. You know, like what could we imagine? How can we serve together what is called for in this time if they were here, or as they're returning in this kind of archetype that they have that was founded at the Christmas Foundation meeting? Yeah, just what can we do? How can we be? You know, is my is my question. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't wait, Dottie, for my answer. And in fact, of course, I have now, my general inner perspective is that at the moment, but since many, many years, it's very difficult in the spiritual world, even if I have no insight, to decide what is the next step. Anthroposophists usually try to talk about the recoming of those individualities as a natural law. But in fact, what Steiner tried to change in the 20th century was, as he often said, one of the last trials to fight against the abyss. And without being melancholic, I think we have to see that most of the initiatives did not work effectively. So the situation almost in all fields of life is now much more difficult than it was in 1924. And now to decide what has to be done from a Michaelic movement in the spiritual world, where is the next step to save the earth and to work effectively, this is a very difficult decision. And I think it is not yet clear what has to be done. And those decisions take time. So I think all these big individualities, especially Steiner himself, it was difficult to decide 1,000 years ago what to do with the Michael movement. And it's very difficult from my point of view now. Of course, we are not lost. Of course, the earth is not lost. Of course, Ariman has not won the fight against Christ. But I always wanted to say it is not so easy, the question, oh, where they are now and what they do now. And because, I mean, the Michael group is not a family, of course, but you know, but it is just a group who try to save the destiny of the earth. And now to decide what is possible now, I think it was many things were possible 100 years ago. And in many fields of life, let's say about economy and so on, it is now in such a destructive state that for me, those individualities around Steiner, they need really a deep retreat. And I think they have it, just to find out how to go on earth. I mean, in the spiritual world, it's not so difficult to go on, but on earth. So I think what we can do as the Anthroposophical Society on Earth is, yes, to go on with the anthroposophy, to study those biographies, to find access to the forces they lived in those souls. And then we are very touched, as you said, Dottie, and we'll find also inspirative moments in ourselves and connections to them. And sometimes we feel really inspired by them. But the question, where are they now? And what is the future of them? For me, I let it completely open. And I feel the gratitude of being connected and inspired in what I have to do at the moment. But the destination of the humanity and the Michael stream, for me, it is still an open question. So that's just a very personal statement, because sometimes I'm wondering how easily people talk about Ida Wegman coming back and Steiner coming back. And I think it is a much bigger challenge now to find the opportunity to help for those fighters. Yeah, that's what I feel from my personal point, very personal point of view.